So I actually think that this point that he's making right here is super important, because if it's true that Muhammad is using traditions and things that are not actually of a historic nature and integrating those into the Quran, that's a really big problem for the Quran. And I can actually think of one example of this that is absolutely testable, where the Quran disagrees with the claims of Christianity, the claims of the Bible, and the agreement of secular historians. And that would be the crucifixion of Jesus. So the Bible obviously clearly states that Jesus was crucified, that he died, that he rose from the dead. The Quran says Jesus was not crucified, but was actually made to appear so. So the reason that this is so important is that there are more sources for the crucifixion of Jesus on the cross, for the death of Jesus, than any other event in the ancient world. Furthermore, these sources are not just internal sources or biblical sources. You do have the four Gospels describing this. You have Paul's letters describing this. You have the Acts of the Apostles describing this. But you also have Tacitus, the Roman historian, writing about this. Josephus, the Jewish Roman historian, writing about this. Lucian, writing about this. Mara bar Serpian, sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong, writing about this in the late 1st century, early 2nd century. The Jewish Talmud, interestingly, writes about this. And then you have the church fathers, Ignatius, Justin Martyr. The overwhelming majority of historians, including secular Jewish and Christian scholars, agree that Jesus was crucified. New Testament scholar John Dominic Crossan, who is, by the way, a skeptic, says, quote, that he was crucified is as sure as anything historical can ever be. Again, that's a skeptic saying that. Similarly, atheist Bart Ehrman, who I'm sure you're familiar with, says the crucifixion of Jesus by the Romans is one of the most secure facts we have about his life. And finally, Craig Evans, N.T. Wright, Gary Habermas, and virtually all credentialed scholars in relevant fields affirm Jesus's crucifixion as a historic event. And again, the details of the crucifixion that indicate that this crucifixion actually led to a death are crystal clear. People didn't get crucified in the 1st century in Rome and not die. There's zero evidence of that. And there's a bunch of, again, even medical, we could do a whole other video on the medical signs that show that he really was dead. So this is just one point that I want to hammer home, where you actually have historians, like 99% of historians, acknowledging that Jesus died on the cross in the 1st century under Pontius Pilate. And again, that's internal and external. And then you have 600 years later, Muhammad kind of trying to piece together amalgamation of different events and stories and narratives in the formation of the Quran in the way that Wes Huff is describing here. And he gets this extremely, extremely critical detail wrong. And again, the Quran as a source is 600 years after the fact. So I think that, again, there's a lot of other examples of this that we could use, but this is probably just the most dramatic, where you have the Quran on the opposite side of an issue as both essentially all historians and Christianity and the Bible testifying to the death of Jesus on the cross. I think that the Quran clearly has to be seen as being outweighed by earlier and greater sources that, again, scholars in relevant fields are looking at this and saying, no, Jesus definitely died on the cross under Pontius Pilate in the 1st century under Tiberius Caesar. Like, this is a historic fact. It's very odd that the Quran disagrees with that historic fact. And I think it does undermine, or at least raise the question about what else is kind of being erroneous within this sort of amalgamation that Muhammad was putting together 600 years after the fact. So just an interesting kind of thread from history to look at. I like the way that Wes kind of broke this down. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. I wanted to let you guys know really quick